Hello friends, and welcome back to video number 5 in our course building a website application using Spring Boot. Now, starting from this video, we will talk about the back-end details, which is the most important thing when you build a website. This video will talk about two things: about the application properties of the website and creating a database. As I told you at the beginning of this course, that we will build two types of database, either a PostgreSQL, which I will use when I will build this website, and also I will tell you how you can build a MySQL. Now, if you want to know how to install PostgreSQL server on your system, I have two courses. The first one by the name of PostgreSQL, which is fully encrypted, and I have another course for by the name of permissions. In that course, I installed a PostgreSQL from a precompiled package which is not encrypted. So you could go back to these two courses, one of them, and see how you can install the PostgreSQL. In this video, I will directly start to create the database. So I will tell you how you can create the database and the tables. So first, let's start with the application properties. Now, for any Spring Boot application, you need properties. These properties, you can have a good insight about them, and you could know all the properties that you need to know you need to use in your application in this link. So you could find every property that controls your Spring Boot application in this link, and of course you gradually will realize which one do what, but it's a good thing that you know where to find these properties. Now I will use in the application some of these properties, and I will tell you now about them. Of course, as we said, the static resources for the HTML file resides in the template folder, and the suffix is .html. Now here's a good thing you need to know. If your resources not in the static folder, or not in the template folder, or not in the static folder, when you want to write their directory where they reside, you need to override the default directory. So you need to say where are these static resources. By default, Spring Boot will look at the static folder. If your resource is not in the static folder, suppose you created a folder in here by the name of XYZ. So here you need to override the default location, and you write class path XYZ, for instance, and you create a folder here by the name of XYZ, and you put your resources in it. This is if you wish to override the default location of the Spring Boot, which are these two. Otherwise, if you don't want to override, you just comment it back, and that's it. Spring Boot will look for the resources in the default location. If you create properties files or messages that we have said before, you need to add their path. You need to tell Spring Boot where to find these files. In here, in the Spring config location, you say class path messages.properties, which is this file. If you wish to add more languages, suppose French language, Spanish, Arabic, whatever language you wish, you can also add comma class path slash messages AR properties, or comma class path messages French properties, whichever language you wish. You can add the location of it so that Spring Boot will know where to look for these messages properties files. Okay, let's move on. Now these are some properties which you don't have to talk about right now, but I will talk only for the basic ones, for the most important ones, for the database. Now in this video, in this application, I will use the PostgreSQL. So I need to tell the URL, the JDBC URL, using the PostgreSQL URL. And as you know, the port is 5432 for the Postgres, and you need to write the database name here. And here, this is a very important thing. This is the local, international local time. International time. You see, if you don't write this thing in here in the properties file, and when you finish your application and you deploy it in the remote server, when the application starts, it will give you an exception. Your application will not work, your website will not work, and it gives you an exception saying that there is a conflict in times between the world time and your local time. So it's better that you tell your application to use the international time by doing this, the universal time. So you just add this server time zone, UTC, and you will get rid of that exception when you deploy your application, your website, onto the remote server. And you create a username and a password for the database, for the server. Now this is if you wish to use the PostgreSQL. If you don't wish, if you wish to use the MySQL, then you could do these two lines, uncomment these two lines. This is a driver of the MySQL, and this is the same thing, but the JDBC URL of MySQL. The port will be 3306, and the database, and again the universal time. Now since I'm using Postgres, so I'll comment this one. Now the dialect, you need to add this dialect for the annotation that you will use. Sometimes you will get an exception telling you that there's a difference in the annotations readings. So it's better you add this property or the naming strategy that will use for the annotations of the JavaX persistence. When you put them in the model file, you will use the JavaX persistence annotations. Sometimes you will get an exception about the naming strategy. So it's better you put this naming strategy as a physical naming strategy standard. Again, in the model file, when you use the JavaX persistence annotations, sometimes you get an exception telling you that there is a conflict in the naming strategy. So it's better you add this property to avoid that exception. As for the dialect, if you use the MySQL, then you could use this dialect, or this for Postgres, since we are using a Postgres, this is the dialect of the Postgres. If you are using MySQL, then you uncomment it and comment, of course, you comment this one. If you use MySQL, so if you use MySQL, you uncomment this dialect, and of course, you need to use this MySQL. If you are using PostgreSQL, then you have to use the PostgreSQL dialect. Don't forget this. So the dialect with the corresponding server, MySQL, or the PostgreSQL with the PostgreSQL server. If you are not using any blob, sometimes also in practice when you do now, these exceptions happens at the production when you deploy your website. So what I'm telling you, this exception, you want maybe you won't face them in the development time, but you will face them in the production when you deploy your work. So it's better if you don't use a blob in your database, the binary large objects in your database. If you don't use a binary large objects, then it's better to add this line, and it will save you the exception that you will get in the production. Now here we will use the pool, a Hickory pool, and these are the properties of the Hickory pool. Now it's highly recommended that you use a pool. Pool will increase the efficiency of your JDBC connection. So and I will not go through the details of the JDBC. I suppose you know much about the JDBC and how you can improve them by using a pool, because if you are a programmer and you don't use a pool, you are not a programmer. If you are dealing with a database and you don't use a pool, then you are not a database programmer. So the pool will enhance to you much the performance of your database and your JDBC connections. So I'm using here the Hickory pool with these settings for the pool. It's up to you to use whichever pool you wish and whichever settings for the pool. Now for the security, as I said, we will not use it now. In the next course, I will implement the Spring security on the Spring Boot web application. So this is the general properties that you need to use when you set up the Spring Boot application properties. The other thing is that we need to create a database by the same name. Okay, we need to uncomment this. We need to create a PostgreSQL database with the admin username and some password, and with all the tables that is required, so we can handle the login and the registration of any user. Okay, again, if you don't know how to install your PostgreSQL server on your machine, on your server, then I have, as I said, 2 courses. The first course is how you install a fully encrypted PostgreSQL server. The other course is about the name. The name is permissions, which in that course I installed a precompiled package of PostgreSQL. You could go to either one of these courses and see which one is suitable for you, and you can install the PostgreSQL. Now how you will create the database and the tables and the users, now we will talk about it in here. So if you want to create a database by the name of SpringDB, which is the same name as in here, this is the SpringDB name for the database, and we will create 3 tables: the user role, the roles, and the users. And this is the joining table. Obviously you can see this is the table, the role table, which have some columns, and these are the roles. We will create 3 roles. For me, I'm creating 3 roles: super user, admin user, and site user. You are free to create whichever roles that is suitable for your requirement, but for me, I think 3 will do enough for this tutorial. So the super user, the admin user, and the site user, I'll give them the role ID, the role name, and the role description, and the primary key will be the role ID. The second table is the users. Now any user, when login or register, needs some details about that user. For the login, we just need the email and the password, but for the registration we need other details, like the email, like the password, the first name, last name, the recovery email. So these columns, it's totally up to you which one you want to add to the registration when a user wants to register to your application. But in general, the email and the password are the most important ones, so you have to have them in your registration. The other columns is totally up to you, the user ID name or the first name, last name, recovery email. These things are important because we will use them when a user forget his password and he want to reset his password, then we're gonna need these two columns, the status DB and the token DB. So you need to add them in here because this has nothing to do with the user information. It has to do with the user when he lose his password. So we need them, these two columns. And this is the joining table between the user role. We will call it user role. We have two tables, role and users. So this is the joining table. And then we can insert few things to just make sure that the databases are working. And that's it. This is the PostgreSQL, how we can set it up, the database. And by doing this, of course, you will do this in the command line, in the terminal. So you will open a terminal, and then you can do this, all these lines, so you can add these tables. This is for the PostgreSQL, which I will use, but in case you are using a MySQL, it's almost pretty much the same, except for a few things that here, for instance, we use an integer, but for the PostgreSQL it uses serial. The serial means it's auto-incremented. This user ID number will be auto-incremented. Now for the MySQL we will use just an integer and we will auto-increment it manually. So this is the difference, but this is for the MySQL, almost the same with some differences. The tables, the users, the roles, almost the same. So these are the two things, and also you will do it, of course, if you wish to use the MySQL, you will do it on the command line, on the terminal, and don't forget to change to this two lines and change dialect to the MySQL. Now once you have done this and you set it and you set up the database, the connection, the JDBC connection, the tables, and then you can just start the database. For the PostgreSQL, you can system control start PostgreSQL service, or if you want to stop it, you just stop it